In 1996, Anthony Minghella did what many thought could not be done, bring Michael Ondaatje's novel, The English Patient, to the screen. The film won 9 Academy Awards, including Best Director. After a 2-year hiatus, he has returned with yet another risky adaptation, The Talented Mr. Ripley. Based on the 1955 novel by Patricia Highsmith, the psychological thriller stars Matt Damon, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Jude Law. Here is the trailer from the film.
I don't believe a single word you've said.
You're shivering, Marge. Can I hold you? Well, whatever you do, however terrible, however hurtful, nobody thinks that they're a bad person.
The film has been nominated for 5 Golden Globe Awards, including Best Picture and, guess what, Best Director. I'm pleased to have Anthony Minghella back on this program. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
I remember fondly the last time you were here, along with Michael Ondaatje, who pretty much said, this film is as good as my novel, or in some cases even better, which was a remarkable thing for a novelist to say.
Well, it was a remarkable experience for me as a director to have a writer with me on every step of the journey through my adaptation of the screenplay, when we were rehearsing, when we were shooting in the cutting room, when we were promoting the film. It's very sad that Patricia Highsmith died as I was writing the first draft of the screenplay, because I would love to have reproduced that particular sense of collaboration with a novelist.
Here's what's remarkable about this movie, for me, and a lot of things. First, you cast, or Sidney Pollack or somebody, I assume you, a lot of these very talented and now well-known actors before they had won a bunch of awards and before they were in the full bloom of their success.
But it was me, and it was more luck than judgment, I have to say. It's just that I looked around and I knew it was a film about young people. So I tried to look around and see who were the brightest and most interesting group of young actors that I could find in the world, actually, in Australia and London, in New York and Los Angeles, and tried to put them in the film. And when I turned round, a year later, they were all suddenly, household names.
And had an Academy Award in one
Yeah,
case.
that was very useful, and also quite daunting. I mean, I think the shadow of their success sort of casts itself over the film a little bit, because the film is a very ambitious and provocative story, and in some ways you want the film to speak louder than any particular element of it. And I felt that the fact that Matt and Gwyneth had such enormous success, and perhaps in some ways subverted the expectation in terms of people coming to see them and the kind of roles they've become famous for, and this is such a different and a big departure for both of them.
Ambitious and provocative undertaking, why?
Well, it's an American movie, but it's a film about a man who gets away with murder. It's a film which has a kind of ambivalent sexual element to it, and a sort of undercarriage of yearning, which is really, its sexual navigation is strange. And I think it's a very dark film, and it's a film which asks you to think and to feel. I think most movies, particularly would take on the shape of a thriller, deliver a slightly more conventional sense of how the world works. I wanted to make a cautionary tale, a kind of philosophical story wrapped up in the suspense vehicle. And
a cautionary meaning what?
Well, there's something to think about in this film. It's about, the film asks the question whether it's better to be a fake somebody than a real
The line
nobody.
that he just said there in the trailer.
Which I think is more prescient now than perhaps it was in the 50s, this sense that I feel we're bombarded in the media by images that demand that we give up on ourselves in some way, that we feel badly about who we essentially are, that we're told that we should change our hair, change our bodies, change our lifestyle, change our couches, change our cars, change everything about ourselves, was essentially what we are is not good enough. And I think there's a moment in the course of growing up, particularly, which is where you realize that the essential business of being a human being is to be alone, and that the essential yearning of a human being is not to be alone. And how we, in some ways, make sense of those two perceptions defines us. And one of the ways that people do, and perhaps I've done in my life, is to say, well, if I hide who I essentially am, if I keep that a secret and aspire to be somebody else, perhaps people will find it easier to accept me. And at the heart of Ripley, I think there's somebody who's hiding and giving up on who he is in order to be accepted by a world he'd like to belong to. So I think that's something which is common to many people, I think, not just to him and me.
Yeah. Well, a lot of interesting things you just said. One is, I suspect that without having a PhD in psychology or understanding violence and crime today, part of what violent acts in high school are A, because of media images, and B, the effort to commit some act to be somebody. Because they feel, and this was certainly true in one of the instances in terms, because we have the diaries and we have the statements of people saying they didn't like me, so they struck out. I was nobody, and they'll now know who I was. It is that sense of violent act to bring identity.
Well, I think that's very interesting what you're saying. Is the whole issue of who you are, of identity, of this business of feeling strange, which I think is common to most young people. And I think that part of the film is interested in how you are selected in life, how you are chosen. Everybody's had that fear in the schoolyard of when a team is being selected, of being the person who's not chosen, and what it is you have to do in your life to be chosen. And I think the very things which make you strange, or make you feel strange earlier in your life, are the things which make you most interesting as an adult, and you sort of cling to. But there's a time when you're very happy to surrender everything which is queer about you in your life. And I think that's the very dangerous place. And the decisions you make in order to accommodate yourself are the things which define you as an adult. And I think the film is very tied up with that.
Is there a lot? I haven't seen the earlier version made. I've forgotten who was the director.
René Clément.
René Clément.
Yeah.
And Alain Delon starred. A different film at a different time. Was the homoeroticism a significant element of that film?
Well, interesting enough, there are three elements about that very good and interesting film in the 50s.
One of the Purple something.
Purple Noon, Plan Soleil it was called.
Right.
One of them is that the book is essentially about the American experience of Europe.
Right.
It's about the attraction that Americans have had, particularly people who are living on the margins of society, have had about the possibility of making yourself up through travel by going to live somewhere else. That's at the heart of the novel. The other issue at the heart of the novel is about being obsessed with somebody who has everything that you want, the person who is everything you yearn for, and obsessed in all kinds of ways. Obsessed in terms of wanting to possess that person, of wanting to be him. It's extremely incredible frisson in the novel. And the other thing, which is very specific about the book, it's about a man who commits murder and isn't caught. Well, in Plan Soleil, he commits murder and is caught. Yeah. He's not obsessed with the man, he's obsessed with the man's money and his girlfriend, and it's about a Frenchman living in Europe. And so I think
a lot of differences.
But it's a remarkable movie. This film is much more interested in trying to pull out what I felt was at the heart of her book. And I think that the whole business of adaptation to me is just to try and find a way of walking into a room, having been the ideal reader, and saying, this is what I thought I read, this is what really excited me, this is what interested me, this is what I want to argue with in this book.
Now, here's what's interesting about it, too, back to your selection of the actors. You got involved in this project because, as I remember, Sidney Pollack was admiring of two films you'd made, earlier films, and wanted you to do the screenplay. Am I right?
Exactly. Well, what happened was...
And you had not then released or made English Patient.
What had happened was I was marooned. I was trying to make The English Patient, and we couldn't find anybody to finance it. I was in Italy. It was falling apart. There was no Miramax. And so I didn't really know what to do. I mean, I just was clinging on, as it were, to the raft of The English Patient, hoping something would happen. And Sydney called me and said, don't just be marooned there. Right. Do something. Come and adapt this book for me. And it was a book I'd read many, many years as a playwright. The first notice I ever got for my first play said, this play reminds me of Patricia Highsmith's work, and I'd never heard of her, so I went out and bought the book of The Talented Mr. Ripley. And so it rang some bell, and I thought, well, Sidney is a great mentor of mine and a huge supporter, and he remembers in some odd way that I'm available, and I remember this book, and so I ought to get involved. So I started to write it, imagining I would just do this in what I hoped was a hiatus, before I made The English Patient, and within 2 or 3 days of starting to work on it, I called him and said, I'll do it, but I have to hold on to it because I want to make this movie myself. And
so you, even then, and then after you'd made English Patient.
I then spent another year doing 20 or so drafts of the screenplay, and then started shooting.
But he automatically said, before English Patient was released, before he'd seen English Patient, you're the guy to direct this film.
Well, he'd read, because he was so close to me, he'd read every draft of The English Patient. He was very involved. In fact, he was one of the people who suggested we went to Harvey Weinstein at Miramax. He's been a real quiet friend on The English Patient and on this film, a great supporter.
How important is this notion for you, because The English Patient was so successful? Everybody who gets such extraordinary attention for their first major film, Academy Award, thinks about, are they going to think that I'm a one-time wonder? And what do I have to do to make sure they know that I'm not?
Well, the former is certainly true. I mean, the former, the sense of, oh goodness, I hope this isn't just an enormous flash in the pan. And
I had one good idea, and that was
yeah, exactly. And I'd already committed to doing Ripley. Yeah. And so I came out of the tunnel of The English Patient and went straight into the tunnel of Ripley, and didn't think about it really a great deal until about a week before the film was released, and I suddenly realized that I had this elephant on my head. And I mean, I felt that what was important was to first of all, I did one very clever thing, which is I kept most of the group of filmmakers from The English Patient with me, the same director of photography, costume designers, composer. Everybody sort of came with me, and they're the most querulous, difficult, demanding, opinionated group of people. And so I felt that collectively there was a chance that we could work as well together again. I thought going back to Italy, which is a place that I love and is so rich and resonant, again with the same group of people, that if I could try and keep everything together, then that would be the focus rather than worrying too much. I think one of the things I've noticed about myself is that I can be very strong in the process of making a movie and extremely weak in the process of releasing it, in the sense that I'm quite iconoclastic when I'm thinking about a film and when I'm working on it, and quite demanding. The minute I finish the film, I'm the weakest, most tarty person. I just want everybody to accept and like what it is I've done. So I think if that part of me gets too much sway during the making of the film, I'd never be able to make the movies I want to make, which are always going to be difficult and always going to be, I suppose, in a very fine place between failure and success. And so I better reside in the process of making rather than the process of summarizing what it is I'm doing.
Are you making Charles Frazier's great novel, Cold Mountain, into a movie?
I am.
And who are you going to star in that?
You can't put me on the spot like that. I haven't even finished writing, but it is a great movie and a great book, and I hope I can do it justice, and I hope that he'll come with me on that journey.
Okay, but there's an interesting thing. I'm bringing it up now because we look at these three great novels. You know, I mean, you like this idea of tackling these projects in which you take a novel that is complex and rich and interesting. And Cold Mountain is set in the Civil War, so it's a whole different thing. Let me take a look at this notion. You add characters to the book. Cate Blanchett's character did not exist.
Well, if we were adapting any book together and we were looking at it, first of all, the thing we'd have to deal with is the fact that, you know, part of the quality of reading a book is the wonderful secret between the reader and the book. It's sort of perfect read. You're making your own movie as you read a book. But also it's about something essentially implicit. Whereas making a movie is about something essentially explicit. You have to point a camera at an event. So if a line in the book says, Ripley had a wonderful 2 days in Venice, you know, short of putting Matt there with a caption and smiling, and then you have to say, well, what does that mean? What is a wonderful day for Tom Ripley in Venice? And the minute you start to determine that and dramatize that, first of all, you have to have him meet somebody, you have to have him do things, say things. Immediately you start to say as much about yourself as you do about the material that you're adapting. Essentially, it's like when you tell a joke that you've heard that made you laugh. In the retelling of it, Italo Calvino said this, that's where it becomes beautiful. It's where you have to commit yourself, and when you're making a movie, you commit yourself to 1,000 decisions every day, and in the process of making those decisions, willy-nilly, you reveal something about yourself. And so, obviously, what I was trying to do was to say, well, Ripley is here, he goes to Rome, he's having a wonderful time. He would probably want to meet somebody who approximates, because he's living Dickie's life at that point, to the kind of life that Dickie had, to the kind of relationship that Dickie had. He'll find himself a woman who's elegant and blonde and privileged and a thoroughbred. So Cate Blanchett emerged for me alongside, because I'd already cast Gwyneth, as an idea. And so I started to grow, as it were, a character who was rather like the character that Dickie had.
You on the set, I mean, what was the challenge here for you as the director, interpreting this novel? You've got these actors together. What were the mountains you felt like you had to climb to make it work?
Well, people thought, I think, when I made The English Patient, that it was a very difficult film to make, and it was difficult intellectually and emotionally. It wasn't particularly physically difficult, even though I broke an ankle and was dragging it through the desert, because we were in very controlled environments, and for directors that's the key issue, is how to control the world you're shooting in. We were in monasteries, we were in the Sahara, there aren't many other people around by definition. In this movie, because Ripley in some ways is the ideal tourist, he wants to go to, the character wants to arrive at every single principal location in Italy. And the writer in me was very happy to sit in London or Italy, wherever I was writing, and write the Spanish Steps Day, St. Mark's Square Day, you know, the Galleria in Naples Day. And I would have happily, as a director, killed the writer in me when I got on the set, because to try and bring Rome or Naples or Sicily, Ischia, to try and bring those places into 1958 and shoot there, is an extraordinary folly, really. I mean, I was in Rome last week, and I went to the Spanish Steps, and there were about 6,000 or 7,000 tourists there. And I thought, well, what were we thinking of to try and go there and steal footage, and not only steal footage, but bring it back, to 50 years ago. And so every day it was like being in some kind of guerrilla warfare. Absurd. We had gondoliers striking, we had flooded squares, we had thousands of people just milling. There's a great, the film in some ways, genuflects towards Fellini's La Dolce Vita. I set it in the same year, and I had this whole fantasy about how Anuka May could walk behind his film and come into the back of our set. I was very much involved with trying to evoke that period. And it's an impossible thing to try and do now, to try and go back and do that. And so every day was somehow just clinging by our fingernails to trying to achieve that the sense of the period. And any sane person, going back then, I would never try and do it again. It was just a madness.
You would not?
I wouldn't. I'm looking forward to going to North Carolina with cold night where it's nice and quiet.
That's a pleasure for anybody. Here is the other thing that interests me about this movie. As the director who's plotted this, who's there on the scene, who's seen what the evidence that you want to put on the screen every day, when you go to the editing room, does it change what you want to do with the movie? Did you get this movie and all of a sudden, 2/3 of the way in, you say, God, I've got to, it's not like I wanted it to be. I've got to make it take a turn here. I've got to do something. I've got to enhance this. I've got to diminish this. I've got to make it different than I imagined in my head when I was looking at it piece by piece.
Well, I think, I'm extremely compulsive in the preparation of a film.
Not surprised.
A lot of time working on the screenplay, then 6 months with the production designer patrolling the sort of boot of Italy, trying to find places I wanted to shoot in. A long time just looking and thinking, drawing, planning. And then when I show up on the set, I try not to think about any of that and to just witness as best I can what's in front of me. And some miraculous things happen if you don't look where you thought you were going to look, but just look over there and you suddenly think there's a whole world here that can come into this movie, because Italy is such a significant character in the film, and the whole sort of sense of a different Italy, a real Italy, as opposed to an American or British idea of what Italy is. I mean, this film is set in a place called Montebello, which is a fictional name, but the Italians use the word Montebello to describe Mount Etna, which is a volcano. Yeah. It gave me a whole idea of shooting a kind of ravishing surface, but having this danger lurking, sort of beauty and danger combined. So obviously when I got home, I'd had a screenplay. When I got home, I had 4 hours of cut material, because I just looked so much and saw so much, and the film grew in front of me. And then it's rather like, my mother's a wonderful cook, and she makes great pasta and great ragu, and she would put the sauce on a stove on Friday, and we'd eat the food on Sunday, and the sauce would be simmering on the stove. And so part of the process for me is, with Walter Murch, who's my editor and sort of teacher, is that we put the film on the stove, as it were, and just wait and let it boil away and boil away and boil, and to try and find what the film really is, as opposed to the film I thought I was making. And in the process of doing that, obviously, then you learn and you have to change. And I keep writing right through the post-production period. I'm always going into the post-production, looping and writing new lines, and just trying to see what exactly it is we've got and what we should have. So it's an interesting process.
And on a percentage basis, the film that you end up with is what percentage of the film you thought you had starting editing?
This is so close to the film that I thought I was writing. Incredibly close. Incredibly close. Partly, I think, because of Matt Damon, because I think that he's on every single scene of the film, and he was such an accomplice to me, and because he's a writer himself. An accomplice.
Yes, I know, I'm saying a partner.
Well, in the sense that I think he's a filmmaker as well as an actor. He's a writer, he's got a very shrewd sense of what's going on in a movie. He's very, very smart and very sensitive. And I don't remember working with an actor who was so in concert with what it was I had in my head. When he spoke about the film, I thought I was speaking about it. And so I get back from him such an incredibly accurate and sort of dignifying version of what I had in my mind. And because he's in every scene, I feel the film is very remarkably like the movie I planned.
Is this a big risk for him? Is this...
He doesn't think so. I mean, he gets... I think it's an enormous, fearless and courageous performance. But I think he feels he's an actor. It's a part he liked very much. You're always taking risks as an actor. He didn't think this was a particularly difficult film for him to make. And
he did not think so.
No, at the time of... I mean, a choice for him to make in terms of making the movie. He was on the set every single day. He wanted to maintain a particular body weight so he was the same shape as Jude. And so he ran 6 or 7 miles at the end of filming every day. He was in, as I said, with me every single day. And also because of the nature of the shooting, which was that we just had to grab footage. There's a moment where Gwyneth assaults him on, with her back to the Grand Canal. Very important moment in the film. But if you'd been there with us on that day and seen exactly what was going on, which is that there was an AD at one end of the canal, an AD at the other end with a megaphone going, "You have 7 seconds before the Japanese tourists arrive behind Gwyneth's back," and so we were just, everybody had to be ready at all times so we could turn over, shoot, move the crowds away, go somewhere else, shoot. And so to maintain that focus for 100 days of shooting, that was a huge chore. But I think for him, he thinks if it doesn't hurt, it's not real acting, it's not real work.
Hoffman is great.
He is amazing. He's it's very funny. I was looking at a tape the other day of the actors talking about the film for this sort of electronic press kit that they make. And you go from Gwyneth, who's very sort of considered and talking, and Matt who's talking, and Kate Blanchett is very smart, and Jude, and they're all very intelligent, articulate group of people. And then suddenly it cuts to Phil, and there's this guy going, "And Freddie is the guy. He's the man." And it's like you've suddenly flipped channels, and you're watching a completely different. He's an amazing, amazing actor, and I think he has exploded this year into movies, and people have suddenly worked out what a great national resource he is for movies.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you.